Before we begin with the next Caesar's adventure against the Gauls, don't forget to subscribe. Let us begin. While Caesar was setting out for Italy, he sent Servius Galba with the 12th Legion and part of the cavalry to the Nantuates, Veragri, and Seduni, who lived from the borders of the Allobroges, Lake Geneva, and the Rhone River up to the highest Alps. The reason for sending him was that he wanted to open up the route through the Alps, which merchants had been accustomed to travel with great danger and heavy tolls. He allowed Galba, if he deemed it necessary, to station the legion for wintering in those places. After several successful battles and the capture of many of their forts, with envoys sent to him from all sides, hostages given, and peace made, Galba decided to station 2 cohorts among the Nantuates and to winter himself with the remaining cohorts of the legion in the village of the Veragri called Octodurus. This village was situated in a small valley enclosed by very high mountains. Since the village was divided into 2 parts by a river, he granted one part to the Gauls for wintering and assigned the other, which was left vacant, to the cohorts. He fortified the place with a wall and a ditch. After several days of wintering had passed, and he had ordered grain to be brought there, he was suddenly informed by scouts that all the Gauls from the part of the village he had given them had left at night, and that the mountains overlooking the valley were held by a large force of Seduni and Veragri. This happened for several reasons, leading the Gauls to suddenly decide to renew the war and attack the legion. First, they despised the legion because it was not fully manned, with 2 cohorts detached and many soldiers individually absent to fetch supplies, and second, because of the disadvantageous position, as they could descend from the mountains into the valley and throw their weapons without their initial attack being able to be withstood. Additionally, they grieved over their children taken from them as hostages, and they believed that the Romans were not just opening up routes, but also trying to permanently occupy the peaks of the Alps and annex those territories to the neighboring province. Having received this information, Galba, since the fortifications of the winter quarters were not fully completed and not enough provisions of grain and other supplies had been made, as he had thought there would be no war after the surrender and acceptance of hostages, quickly called a council to ask for opinions. In the council, considering the sudden danger and seeing that almost all the higher ground was occupied by a multitude of armed men, and with the paths blocked so that neither reinforcements could arrive nor supplies be brought in, some opinions were expressed to abandon the baggage and break out using the same routes by which they had come to seek safety. However, the majority decided to reserve this plan for the last resort and to try to hold the camp and see the outcome of events. After a short interval, scarcely giving time for arranging and executing their plans, the enemy, at a given signal, rushed down from all sides and began to throw stones and spears at the rampart. At first, our men, with their strength intact, bravely defended and did not throw any weapon in vain from the higher ground. And whenever any part of the camp seemed stripped of defenders and was being pressed, they would rush there and bring help. But they were being overpowered by the fact that, due to the duration of the battle, the enemy, worn out, would retreat from the fight while fresh forces replaced them. Our men, because of their small numbers, could do nothing about this, and not only was there no opportunity for a tired soldier to leave the fight, but even for a wounded man to leave his position and take a rest. When the battle had continued for more than 6 hours and our men were not only exhausted in strength, but also running out of weapons, and the enemy was pressing harder, starting to break through the rampart and fill the ditch, the situation reached a critical point. Publius Sextius Baculus, a first-rank centurion whom we mentioned as having been wounded in the battle with the Nervi, and Gaius Volusinus, a military tribune, a man of great strategic skill and bravery, ran to Galba and told him that there was only one hope of safety left: to make a sortie and try a final attempt at relief. So, after calling the centurions together, he quickly informed the soldiers to cease fighting for a short while, only to catch the thrown weapons and recover from their exertion. Then, at the given signal, they were to break out of the camp and place all their hope of safety in their valor. They did as ordered, and suddenly, breaking out from all the gates, they left the enemy no opportunity to see what was happening or to rally themselves. Thus, the situation changed, and those who had come in hopes of capturing the camp were surrounded and intercepted from all sides. Of the more than 30,000 barbarians who had come to the camp, more than a third were killed, and the rest, terrified, were driven into flight and not even allowed to stop in the higher places. Thus, with all the enemy forces routed and stripped of their weapons, they retreated within their fortifications. After this battle, since Galba did not wish to test his luck further and had originally come with a different plan for wintering, seeing that things had turned out differently, and especially moved by the lack of grain and supplies, the next day he burned all the buildings of the village and hastened back to the province. With no enemy obstructing or delaying their march, he led the legions safely to the Nantuates and then to the Allobroges, where he spent the winter. After these events, when Caesar believed that Gaul was pacified for all practical purposes, with the Belgae subdued, the Germans driven out, and the Seduni in the Alps defeated, and having set out for Illyricum at the onset of winter, because he wanted to visit and become acquainted with those nations and regions, a sudden war broke out in Gaul. The cause of this war was as follows. The young Publius Crassus was wintering with the 7th Legion near the ocean in the territory of the Andes. Since there was a shortage of grain in those areas, he sent several prefects and military tribunes to neighboring states to procure grain. Among these, Titus Tarasidius was sent to the Asuvi, Marcus Trebius Gallus to the Coriosolites, and Quintus Villanius, along with Titus Stilius, to the Venetii. The Venetii hold far the greatest authority among all the maritime states in that region because they possess many ships with which they regularly sail to Britain, surpass others in their knowledge and experience of nautical matters, and control all the neighboring tribes through their dominion over the limited number of ports scattered along a coast lashed by strong tides and high seas. They started by detaining Silius and Villanius, believing they could recover their hostages, which they had given to Crassus through them. Influenced by their example, their neighbors, as is often the case with the Gauls, suddenly and rashly decided on the same course of action. They detained Trebius and Tarasidius as well and quickly sent envoys through their chiefs to form a united front, agreeing to take no action except by common consent and to share the same fate. They also began to rouse the other states, urging them to prefer maintaining the freedom inherited from their ancestors over enduring Roman servitude. Quickly bringing all the coastal tribes to their side, they sent a common delegation to Publius Crassus, demanding the return of their hostages if he wanted to recover his men. Informed of these matters by Crassus, Caesar, who was further away, ordered warships to be built on the Loire River, which flows into the ocean, and he commanded that rowers be recruited from the province and sailors and pilots be gathered. With these preparations quickly carried out, he hastened to join the army as soon as the season permitted. Upon learning of Caesar's arrival, the Venetii and the other tribes, realizing the magnitude of their offense and detaining envoys who were considered sacred and inviolable by all nations, began to prepare for war and to gather the necessary supplies for their ships, hoping to take advantage of the favorable natural terrain. They knew that the land routes were cut off by estuaries, the navigation was hindered by the unfamiliarity of the region and the scarcity of ports, and that Caesar's army could not stay for long due to the lack of grain. Even if everything went against them, they believed their navy was superior, and they were confident that the Romans lacked the necessary ships and knowledge of the shallow waters, ports, and islands where the war would be fought. With these plans set, they fortified their towns, brought their grain from the fields into the towns, and gathered as many ships as possible in Venetia, where they believed Caesar would first wage war. They also enlisted allies from the Ocismi, Lexovi, Namnates, Ambiliadi, Morini, Diablent, and Menapii, and sought help from Britain, which is located across from these regions. If you, like me, are looking forward to see what is happening in the naval battle to come, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.